Positions. Carly, welcome back.
Hi, great to be back. Happy April Fool's Day, everybody.
Woohoo! I'm
Yeah,
not
it's
gonna
always
lie.
a
I was really expecting something from Bassem today.
we
Oh
don't
no,
know. If
no.
anyone can pull it off. We don't know when it's going to come. It might
Exactly,
not
that's
come
true.
W-
I
today.
shouldn't.
It could come at any time.
Carly, you could be not live right now and thinking you're live. No,
You're
you
live.
are you're on live. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, then, scrap what I was going to say. I'll just go back to the script. No, it's always a nice surprise when I'm live with you guys because I'm watching the show and then it's slightly out of sync with the live. So then it's like, hey, there's MK, which is always a treat.
Very
Um,
nice.
but yeah, great to be here. So should I just jump right
Yeah,
in?
it's all
Go for
you.
Current
it.
affairs content this month. Awesome. So now, as this is a current affairs segment on a show about the Middle East, I would be remiss if I didn't briefly mention what we could call the elephant in the room, since it has captured worldwide attention. But instead, I'll just call it what it literally was, which was the Ever Given in the Suez Canal. As everyone likely already knows, unless they've been hiding out somewhere these past several days, the Ever Given cargo ship has been refloated. Some of the initial headlines were kind of amusing and did not necessarily put the situation in context, approaching this more as if the Ever Given was a kitten trapped in a tree in need of liberation or something like that, rather than a 200,000-ton ship and a demonstration of the mega impact of global trade in a nutshell. There are actually concerns now that crew members with precarious work statuses could be scapegoated for this, when in fact it's a more multi-layered situation. But so much over the past week has been said about this incident, which truly launched 1,000 memes, and we have a couple of my favorites up there on the screen. So I won't flood our brains further too much with widely known facts, but just to say, I think many of us, after being pretty world weary during this pandemic year, were sort of like, yeah, the Suez Canal is broken and maybe it will stay that way for 6 days or 6 months. Who knows? What is time anymore? That just seemed to fit with what's been going on, but it is indeed free. And now that I've gotten that elephant
I
out of the
just
room or off our chests.
I just want to highlight this particular one because I think it is some of the funniest content I've ever seen on the internet.
Tell us what it says.
Okay,
It was
so
a
there's a
struggle to
trend like on
fit, but
Instagram
yeah.
where people post like what's happening in the Sudan, how you can help, etc. So someone made this on Twitter and said, "What's happening in the Suez Canal and how you can help?" And the next slide is boat stuck, can't help. I just think it's
Indeed.
so good.
Thank you,
Anyways,
MK. Yeah, no, that's great because I struggled to choose a favorite. So there's a few up there and they're a little small. So I'm glad we could highlight that because yeah, it seems to be a particular hallmark of our culture. We should get Adil and Malihe back to comment on this, a media phenomenon, but that we post about famine, or not we, the people on this show, but in our society, people post about starvation and famine and war, but with glitter and purple, and it's supposed to make us engaged, or I don't know what it's supposed to do. That should launch a different conversation, but those are some favorites up there. And as I said, we've gotten that elephant off our chest, so I'm going to move on to some perhaps less widely featured or even less fetishized news developments. So yes, I want to move on over to the United States to talk about this brand new voter suppression law that has been passed in the state of Georgia. A key takeaway of the 2020 election is a lesson that America learns again and again, which is that local politics are national politics and are global politics. Republican lawmakers in the US know this better than anyone. Their strategy for a long time, through gerrymandering and through the manipulation of local votes, is to try to suppress voters who are people of color and who are not going to vote to keep Republicans in power. And I just want to explain what this troubling new law does briefly. It requires those who want to do absentee voting to submit a driver's license number or other form of ID. So it's targeting people who might not have that ID and adding a new hurdle for them to prove their identity. Early voting drop boxes will now only be located inside early voting designated locations, no longer in public places like libraries or government buildings. So it's also restricting physical access to early voting. And it empowers the Republican-led legislature to have greater control over the counting of ballots. And significantly, it prohibits volunteers from delivering food, water, folding chairs, and other supplies and support items to voters who are waiting in long lines. And this last one has really resonated with people. We saw some historically long lines in the last election across the country, especially as new voting measures were put in place due to the pandemic. So people waiting for many, many hours. And this provision in Georgia to prohibit water distribution on lines actually reminds me of other policies that we've seen under Trump and before We could just jump to the next images. Thank you, MK. So while Trump was still in office, there was a big case involving humanitarian aid workers who were criminally charged for leaving water at the US-Mexico border. And I wrote about this back in 2019 for Al Jazeera. Under Trump, the US was essentially criminalizing humanitarian aid in its most basic form, water in a desert. And many of our viewers will be familiar with what has happened in Detroit with water shutoffs for people who can't afford to pay their bills. And of course, Flint, which experienced a now infamous water contamination crisis, and actually many other similar situations across the country. So we can't collapse distinctions across these situations. They're, of course, different in obvious ways. What I am saying is that you have to question the motivations of political leaders who don't want people on a voting line to have water and food. Why is that? What are you trying to do? You're trying to get them to leave. And by bringing up these other examples, my point is that it's a slippery slope, and there is a fundamental similarity when we see basic necessities like water being weaponized in any way to prevent people, again, mainly minority communities, from doing something that lawmakers don't want them to do. And in this case, it is to deny them their fundamental right to vote. And Georgia is the state that tipped the Senate in its runoff election. So a lot happening, more updates to come there. Next, I want to briefly address the ongoing crisis for civilians in Yemen. March 22nd was the 6-year anniversary of the beginning of the war in Yemen. And the UN continues to warn constantly about an impending famine with the hope of triggering a response from donor states. But already 16.2 million people are food insecure. The estimated death toll stands at least 233,000. So we've said this before, whatever precipice there was to cross was crossed long ago. We're still reading stories about parents being forced to choose which of their children to ration out food to, based on who's the least sick. And the US and the UK have been complicit in this war, very profitably supplying billions of dollars worth of weapons for the Saudi-led coalition. Significantly, the Biden administration has pledged to end at least some of these arms sales, which is huge, but there's a gap when it comes to continued US support for so-called defensive actions. So 6 long years in something that remains a tremendous crisis, much more that could be said, and planning to continue to feature this going forward. Lastly, one final news topic. The trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who is charged with the murder of George Floyd, began on Monday. Prosecutors have played the full 9-minute and 29-second video of Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck as he died. And eyewitness testimonies have included an off-duty firefighter, an EMT, who testified that she tried and wanted to offer emergency assistance, but was not permitted to do so, as well as many others. The world has been watching since last May and now waits to see if there will be some form of justice. We also just passed the 1-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death, and there is ongoing condemnation of the lack of full accountability for her killing by police shooting in March of last year. And then, of course, we have seen in recent weeks a major response to anti-Asian violence and racism following the horrific Atlanta shootings, another horrible attack on a 65-year-old woman here in New York City just on Monday. We continue to see the Biden administration make strides towards condemning racism and addressing some of these issues. And it's not hard to strike a contrast with Trump, who fueled this violence and emboldened racists. But we're reminded again that these instances of racism and hate are not anomalies. They are reflective of a legacy of racism in this country that continues to thrive from local to international scales. We've talked about some of the examples with wars abroad on this show, and we see that as well, again, at the local scale, going back to the Georgia voter suppression law discussed earlier. So I will leave it there for this month, and looking forward to following up on these issues and catching up more on other items very soon.
As always, super
Yeah,
informative
you
in
were
such a
you were
short
mu-
amount of time.
yeah, you were muted when you said thanks so much. So I think you have
Thanks
to.
so much
Thanks
is what
so
I said
much.
while I was
We
muted.
missed that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Carly,
guys.
and we really hope to see you again as usual next month as we develop the Live with ASI brand into something a bit more different in the summer. We're not sure exactly how, but we have some ideas because so many of the segments, including Carly's segment, including your segment, Carly, are developing into their own. And so we have to figure out how to move forward. But thanks for coming on as usual and for helping with putting together this entire broadcast. See you soon.
Thanks so
Carly.
much, Bassam and MK. See you soon.
Take care.